it all sort of changed when I was 20 and my mum was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. So within 4 months, she just, was no longer there. And so that was just never anything that I ever imagined happening. That kind of changed the trajectory of my life since then. And so that's the reason why I do what I do and that I am who I am now. I really value health and really value kind of just living well, because I know that, it doesn't last forever. I know that life is precious.
This is the Life with Grief podcast, the podcast that talks about and normalizes the complexities of grief, life after loss, and all this entails, and so much more. I want you to think of this podcast as a safe space where I'm a friendly face and we're just journeying through this together to figure out how to live life with our grief in tow. I'm your host, Tara Accardo. I'm a grief and transformational life coach, and I'm here to serve you guidance, support, tangible coping tools, inspiration, and some laughs along the way to help you cultivate a more meaningful, intentional, and beautiful life. But grieving or not, we're getting into countless topics here on the podcast, from coping with loss to self-development and so much more. I'm so grateful you're here. Let's dive right in. Hey, you guys, welcome back to the Life with Grief podcast. I'm your host, Tara Accardo. I am so honored to introduce today's guest to you all. Today, we are chatting with Gaby George. She is a creative grief guide and the founder of the Grief Cocoon. Gaby is a multi-disciplinary artist, and the guidance and work that she provides in the grief space is inspired by her beloved mother, Samira, who she lost at the age of 20 to a rare form of cancer. Gaby supports people to creatively process, befriend, and transform their grief through creative writing, movement, rituals, and community connection. And through the Grief Cocoon, Gaby offers creative online workshops, a podcast, educational online content, a mobile community app, and one-on-one support. She is truly such a beautiful human with this amazing, calming energy that I know you are going to feel just by hearing her voice, and I cannot wait for you to join me in this conversation with her today. We are talking all about the power of creativity in processing and transforming our grief, the importance of community and connecting with others when we're grieving, and embracing grief rather than avoiding it, and of course, talking about how to even do this. I really hope you enjoy this episode today. I have no doubt you will learn so much as I did. So without further ado, let's get into it. Gaby, welcome to the Life with Grief podcast. I am so happy to have you here today. I am so touched by your story in so many ways. And when we first started corresponding, I just saw so many little similarities in our experiences and just like the way that we approach grief and all of these beautiful things. So I'm just really excited for this conversation and for you to share your story, but also just talk about some really important things about grief that I think really need to be addressed. And you just have such a, like I said, just a really refreshing viewpoint on it. I love your content as well. I think that's how we really first got connected at good old Instagram. But just so many things that you've posted have really resonated with me. In fact, one of them recently was about, and I'd love to actually touch on this in the episode today, which is why I bring this up, is like really quite literally holding space for your grief. So like literally setting time aside each day to do that. I spoke about that in a recent podcast episode, but I just love to hammer home the importance of that. So I'd love to get into that eventually as well. But to just kind of kick this off, I always love to have guests just tell us a little bit about themselves. Of course, we are definitely going to get into your experience with grief and loss. But yeah, just who you are, what you like to do for fun, all the good.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me, Tara. I'm really excited to be talking to you today. And so I guess, well, I'll start with a really defining, I think, part of my life is being the youngest of four sisters. And I'm a much younger sibling. So I think I was always sort of fighting to have my voice and no one listened to me. So that's one thing. But yeah, and then I was very, I guess I had a very good childhood and very good upbringing, and My parents were migrants who came to Australia in the 70s. And yeah, I had a fairly good life, but it all sort of changed when I was 20 and my mum was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. And then it was like the later stages. So within 4 months, she just, was no longer there. And so that was just never anything that I ever imagined happening. So that kind of changed the trajectory of my life since then. And so that's the reason why I do what I do and that I am who I am. And apart from that, I guess now I really value health and really value kind of just living well because I know that, it doesn't last forever. I know that life is precious. And so I love to go running. I love to spend time outdoors, hiking and traveling. And I love connecting with people, friends and family. And writing as well is a big part of my life, writing and singing and music, and so a lot of creative stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
Such a creative being. I love it. And I wanted to ask you more about the creativity in terms of our grief, and we'll definitely get to that as well. But yeah, I mean, so just to elaborate a little bit on your mom's journey, and of course, just only sharing whatever you're
mhm.
comfortable with. As far as like the type of cancer it was, can you elaborate on sort of what that was or
Yeah.
what her journey was like?
Yeah, well, it took a while to find, and I think that was part of the issue, but it's called duodenal cancer, and it's, I believe, within the small intestine, and it's kind of a really difficult spot to find. So they just couldn't find it, and so she was just having trouble keeping food down and digesting things, and it took a long time to find out what it was. And so it's not a well-known cancer. So I think also the treatment that was available probably, yeah, wasn't that well researched or that well established compared to other types of more common cancers.
Sure.
So yeah, it was called duodenal cancer. Yeah.
Oh. Oh my gosh,
Mm.
that's so crazy. So the reason I ask this question is because my mom had esophageal cancer, which of course is known, it's not as rare, but I can definitely empathize with watching someone we love like not being able to keep food down. With my mom, like she ended up having breathing issues because of all of
Mm.
this. So when did that sort of start, or like when did you guys sort of start realizing her having these symptoms to when it was like diagnosed, and then, did she even do any treatment? Like, what did that all look like?
Yeah, I think it all sort of maybe peaked at about 6 months. Well, I think it was in within months of finding or getting the diagnosis. But yeah, she there were times I think I just had like flashbacks of like
Yeah.
kind of having to stop on the road, because she needed to vomit and she was
Oh
just, yeah, not able to digest her food. And so,
my
but
gosh.
we still didn't know what it was at that time. So
Right.
they were doing tests, cameras and things like that, and it just wasn't coming up. But she did do treatment. She went through chemotherapy, and I guess through that she lost her hair and she lost a lot of weight. And that obviously, as you might know as well, like it leads to a lot of fatigue and
Mhm.
just tiredness and not a lot of energy. And my mom was just always on the go. So it was odd seeing her just like that, and
Yeah.
seeing her lose weight and lose her hair. It was, yeah, quite a physical change over
Yeah.
time. And yeah, and then it was only 4 months between the diagnosis and her dying. But yeah, she went into palliative care as well in the last couple of months, so in hospital. And
Go
she
fast.
was there, yeah. So
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so just loss of weight, loss of appetite, which she already kind of was struggling with. Loss, yeah, hair loss, tiredness. She actually also got an infection. There was water, just I think those things that happen with,
Everything on top of each other.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Both of my parents had pneumonia at one point as well. Like my mom just a few months before she died. And then my dad, it was like maybe a good 6 or 7 months before, but like they both had it at the same time at one point. And I was
wow.
like, and pneumonia itself can be a little bit scary,
Mm,
people still, die from that. And so it's just,
mm,
yeah, I mean, I think one of the most difficult parts as far as those of us who have lost someone to an illness or to a disease of some kind is that anticipatory grief of watching them sort of lose their literally, hair,
mm,
or the physical things for sure, but just their ability to function and live,
mm.
a bountiful life like we're used to. And so it's
Yeah.
there's so much shock with that, and there's so much that we're trying to process, like, as we're seeing that happen, and I hate
Mm,
even using this word, but, just, like, deteriorating sort of in front of us, and then and then they
mm,
actually die, and you're just like, "Wait, how did" and even if whether or not it was, like, a long time or not, and I guess that's all sort of in the eye of the
mm.
beholder, what people consider to be a long time or not, but, and then you're just like, "Okay, but where did the last, like," in your case, 4 to 6 months go, like,
Mm.
and I wanted to ask you too, like, how was that journey for you, sort of watching this, sort of going with what I'm sure was anticipatory grief for
Mm.
you, and then how did it feel then when she died? Like, and I know this is so cringy for people, but like, was there some relief there a little bit, just as far as like
Mm.
her being out of pain, or like, just talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think I was in denial a little bit, I think
Mhm.
along with my sisters as well, because we'd never really gone through anything like that with someone so close to us, and we were still hopeful, that there'd
Yeah,
be something that would work and that,
totally.
she would get better. And I guess, yeah, eventually we realized like, hey, maybe she won't get better. But I think I was still, because I guess I had to take on, we all sort of were doing a bit of caring, for my
Uh,
mum. But I think, yeah, I was in a bit of denial as well, because I guess I didn't want to believe that that was going to be, we were nearing the end.
her
So
fate, yeah.
yeah, so I guess I actually have diary entries from that time when she was getting worse, and I've got, I guess, a record of what I was noticing at that time, like in terms of her physical changes and even her, I guess, there's a personality as well that they're not the same person
Right.
usually
Yep.
when when they're unwell and when they're getting worse, they kind of do change, and
Absolutely.
they, yeah. So I actually, I forgot that I had been doing writing at that time. I didn't think I was, but when I looked back at my journals, I could see that and it was very raw writing. It was kind of like then when it actually happened, I was still kind of writing, and it was sort of, when you look back at it, it's like a child writing. I just kind of wrote things like, I miss my mom,
Yeah.
or just very basic kind of
Maybe that
simple
doesn't quite
things.
have the depth there that you
Yeah.
might have now. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, I
Because
couldn't
you're only
really
20
say
going
anymore.
through this. I mean, 20
Yeah.
is still baby. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't really articulate anything more than that because it was so painful. But when it actually happened in the moment, I do remember feeling relief, as sad as kind of tragic as it was. I was relieved that she wasn't in pain anymore, because I knew that she was suffering.
Yeah.
So, she was on morphine, and I guess that's to reduce the pain, but she didn't have any quality of life. And so I think when she took her last breath, I actually, that was one of the first things I felt, was like, I'm glad she's not in pain anymore, and I'm glad she's not suffering.
Yeah.
And yeah, I kind of didn't grieve the way that people expected me to. So there was a bit of concern around me and why I'm not like crying a lot, or
Mhm.
I wasn't showing a lot of emotion at the time when it happened. And so people were trying to force me to kind of,
Uh-huh.
they're like, it's okay to cry. And I just didn't really feel like it at the time. I think it was maybe I was in shock
I was
for
gonna say this sounds a lot like shock.
yeah. Yeah, I was in shock, and crying just wasn't happening. And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
also, yeah, and I'm also not the most overly expressive person in public. Like when I'm around a lot of people, I prefer to cry or to express myself privately,
yeah.
especially if I'm, you just want to ugly cry and just kind of lose it.
So fair.
Yeah, and
Been
I
there.
felt like, yeah, I felt like when there was a lot of people around, the comforting kind of made things worse for me. Like
Yes.
it sort of interrupted the process of actually just letting it out,
Yeah.
because people wanted to make you feel better and comfort you and want you to kind of stop crying. And then it's
Right.
like, well,
It's like cry when we ask you to, but then
yeah,
don't make us uncomfortable with your crying.
yeah,
Like, I can't win. Can I just like
yeah,
have my process, please? Like, oh,
yeah. So
oh,
yeah, it was a bit, people were a bit concerned that I wasn't crying enough.
yeah.
But
It's just,
I was okay. I just had my own way of dealing with it.
yeah. Well, I think that's, I mean, a perfect segue into this topic is like we do have our own ways of grieving, and there is, I'm gonna say there's no like right or wrong way. And overarching there is, I think we would both agree that there's certainly better ways to cope, and we'll get
Mm.
there. But yeah, I mean, it's such a beautiful example of the fact that we all do express our grief in different ways. And of course, people have their thoughts and opinions on that. But I actually wanted to ask you, and I'm actually really curious about this more as someone who's an only child. Having, you said, so you're one of
Mm.
four, or you have four, okay, so
Wonderful. Yeah.
one of four. So how, and of course, I don't want you to feel like you need to divulge everything about your sisters, but just in general, like how did they grieve versus how you grieved? Because one of the reasons I bring this up that I think is really important
Mm.
is, we can all lose on paper the same person. You all lost your mom,
Mm.
but great example of how we can all be so individualized in how we express, how we grieve, how we process, and everything. So did all of you kind of do it a little differently from what you remember and observed, or did you sort of feel like you were like black sheep over here not crying, or what did that look like?
Yeah, I think we did have different. I have, I guess, my older sister and my third oldest are a bit more similar than
Mhm.
the rest of us. The middle sister was kind of just choosing not to really acknowledge it much, or she just wanted to pretend like life was normal, and so
Oh,
she wanted to still take her son out to them. I think also she didn't want her son to see her uh, crying and things like that, so
yeah.
she wanted him to feel like everything was normal as well, and that was her way of coping. And so she'd still take her son to the movies and do just the everyday normal things that she would normally do. And I think people could get judgmental about that as well, that like,
Sure.
oh, how can she do that when her mom just died, But she just didn't have the capacity, or didn't know maybe how to deal with it, And
Yeah.
so she just needed to distract herself and escape and do other things. Whereas my older sister, probably she's my older sister and my third youngest are very emotionally expressive, and so they did a lot of crying, and till this day I think I can have more open conversations with them,
Mhm.
because I know that they are already kind of okay with that. I haven't had the same number of conversations with all my sisters about my mum,
Right.
and so you have to sort of know where people are at, even if it's your family, some might not be super comfortable with talking about the person, and some might be. My sister, one of them has a lot of dreams about my mum.
Mm.
And so she would used to share that, and then my older sister would get upset because she was like, why aren't I having dreams
Oh
about
my
mum?
gosh. I've so been there with other family members, and they're just like, why aren't I getting visits? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
shop
So
over here. Yeah.
so yeah, so I think I was the more kind of maybe reserved. Like I kind of just dealt with it more alone. I didn't really want to be around a lot of people, and that wasn't positive for me because I just wanted to be alone and to process it. I think I'm more kind of a introvert where I kind of need alone time to process things. So even when we had lots of people visiting the house, I would just sort of go into a room and sit there by myself and think about things. So,
Yeah, you're like, I just need a hot 10, please. Just like that's so relatable. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas, some people love that, the company and the connection. Now I can appreciate it, but I think initially I needed time alone. So yeah, we all had our own ways. One was more just distracting herself. The other two were kind of they just had so much emotion and just were crying a lot, and they're more kind of extroverted as well. So I think they might have, appreciated having company. And then I was just sort of more, I need time by myself and just space.
Yeah. No, that makes so much sense. And thank you for elaborating on that because like one of the things I'm so like passionate about is spreading just more awareness and acceptance of how people choose to express their grief. And I've definitely had comments in my time from people that imposed their opinions and they either thought I wasn't talking about it enough, or actually more than anything now is probably the opposite. They probably are just like, wow, you talk about it a lot. And I'm just like, yes, I do, because this has been very cathartic for me, actually. And it really has helped me cope and make sense of it and understand it and navigate it. Like losing a parent, you feel very lost. You can feel very alone, even though you might have siblings. You can feel very confused. You lost your mother at a very pivotal time in your life too, being as young as you were. And so actually, okay, so I want to get into the work that you do, but I would actually love to know, like, maybe not how do you feel like losing your mom at the age of 20 impacted sort of just your now adulthood, getting into adulthood? Like, how do you feel like that has maybe, impacted you overall?
Oh yeah, it's had a
You're like,
huge
where do
impact.
I I know that's a
I
tough
think,
question. Sorry.
No, I think, grief impacts all parts of your life. And one is friendships. I think with relationships, and I think, even being an older person losing someone, you can relate to this, where it's like you you can't really relate to people complaining about mundane things, and so
or about their parents who is still very much alive and just annoying them. I'm like, at least you have one.
Yeah, exactly. So I had a best friend at the time who used to complain a lot about her family, and I just I couldn't tolerate it anymore. And so we kind of drifted apart, and because no one I knew had gone through the same thing, it is pretty isolating. So I tried to Google, places or groups where I could go and talk to people about it, but I also didn't find what I was looking for. And I didn't necessarily want, counseling or therapy. It was more just a social space where people were okay to talk about grief, and that's quite hard to find.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had maybe one friend who till today will still check in on me, a high school friend. And so I think it actually showed me like, oh, okay, it really highlights who's really there for you in the hard times and who's just there for the good times. And then you kind of see where people's values are. Like you can it highlights what really matters. And so for me, I was studying psychology at the time. I was finishing my undergrad degree. Actually, I graduated, while my mom was in hospital. And then after that, I just thought, well, actually, I really want to study music. And that kind of even motivated me even more to do that, even though my parents didn't necessarily support me in that, because they were like, music, you can't make a living out of music. Be sensible, So it actually just really, until today, really gave me more of a want and a desire to really live how I believed I wanted to live, like according to my values and according to my true kind of desires. Whereas like before I was just very sheltered. I was very living a pretty comfortable life. And I think that kind of just shattered everything. You know,
Yeah.
losing my mom was just something I never imagined happening, even though we're all human. And
Right.
but I just
Not
didn't
not that
believe.
early, certainly.
Yeah.
Like, man, thought we might have had a few more years, like
Yeah. Yeah. So
ideally
yeah,
into
my
like our 40s or 50s even, or like quote unquote
yeah.
normal. Like
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
got
So
gypped for sure.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, relationships in terms of what I do for work now, I really just followed my curiosity because I just thought I don't actually, want to do anything I don't want to do. Like I don't want to be
Oh,
stuck in a job that doesn't mean anything to me, or where I'm just wasting my life and wasting my time. And so everything I've created in my life so since then has really been something I find meaning in. And it's all about connecting back to my mom as well, because I've developed a different relationship with her. I
yes.
realized that, okay, she's not here physically in the same way that she was, but I can still find ways to connect with her and to yeah, have that relationship. And
Yeah.
so I still remember her words that, I was lucky enough to receive, that, she was very wise. And so I still kind of, that still guides me. And I think now I'm, in a way, I don't think I would be who I am or have the life that I have without that loss. And as much as we we want to have that person back,
Yeah.
I also don't want to be that person that I was. So it's like
Totally
it's
hear you.
it's
Yeah.
really, yeah, it's
That's
complex.
trippy. That's like a very I can understand how that might like mess people up or be like, wait, what are you talking about? Like, but there really is something to be said. I resonate with what you said so much. You have no idea. But it really is like, it sounds like you were going down this path, like you said, of maybe like a job that didn't or wouldn't kind of light you up and just sort of everything, not everything, but you were going in a direction where it was maybe a little bit like against your soul's purpose and like what you might be really meant to do here. And like it is so clear you are a very creative being and all of and it's tricky because I've had people ask me this too, as far as like, do you think that, you know, not like your parents had to die in order for you to like get into this work, but like, what are your thoughts on that? And I'm like, listen, I guess I don't really know. I sort of think there's some divine plan in a way. Guess I'm not really sure. Jury's still out, but like it's interesting to ponder. So, it's sort of just like, well, these were my circumstances, and this is the loss I apparently was supposed to have or go through. You were just again a beautiful example of like, okay, what can I make of that, and how can I live in my truest and highest self while doing that? And okay, this is actually a beautiful segue into the work that you do. So, you are a grief guide, you created the Grief Cocoon. So talk to me just a little bit about sort of how all of that came to fruition. Was this throughout your 20s? Like just walk us through
Mm.
sort of how you got to building this
Mm.
beautiful community that you have now.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned that I started looking for spaces where I could meet other
Yeah.
people and have open conversations about grief, and I didn't find them. And so eventually I started just sharing. I guess after 3 or 4 years, I started to actually write poems and songs that were okay enough to share because
Mhm.
I had done some processing, because before that it was just kind of like raw material, and I couldn't offer anyone anything with that. But after 3 or 4 years, I figured out that, oh, okay, I'm starting to write things that actually might mean something to other people, and where I'm sharing my experiences and insights, and maybe it's actually worth sharing. So I did actually start sharing it, and through that I connected with people who were also grieving. And then I realized, oh, I'm not alone. That was actually the point where I realized I'm not alone, when I started to share my work and people started responding.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it all started with spaces, with open mics where people would come, open mics centered around grief.
Oh
And people
my
would just
gosh. That is not
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. That is like not a thing around me. And I am very upset about it now. And it really, America needs to like get it together because I've never heard of that happening here. And I am here for it. I'm sorry, continue. That's
Yeah,
just
yeah. So
throwing that out there. That's
my first
amazing.
event, yeah, it was
How
like 40
therapeutic.
people showed up to this local space. It was a rehearsal space. It wasn't even like an event space or anything. And people shared their poetry, and I eventually had people sharing songs or even, just things that they created and stories. And I was just amazed because half the people that were there, I just had no idea who they were. And so
Right.
it was like, oh, people actually need this, or people actually, yeah, want to share and talk about grief. And so that eventually led to workshops and led to other sort of events, different types of events where, we had movie nights where we'd play, actually a lot of them were animation movies that had
Love
some
that.
reference to either death or grief or the afterlife. It was really
Yeah.
cool, actually. And then we'd have a conversation about the movie afterwards.
Oh my God.
So,
I'm
and that was
obsessed.
actually that came from a community member at the time. And so I kind of just respond to what people want, but also I've got, I guess, a lot of things I'd like to put out in the world. And so, yeah, a lot of creative writing workshops. I worked with other artists around like animation. We had movement, sound. I've done, yeah, just different types of workshops, creative workshops where people could process grief and share with each other and connect. And so it all started because I needed that space. And then I realized, oh, there are other people out there who also need that space. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Hey, my friend, are you needing some relief from your grief? If so, I have an exciting new offering coming really soon that will help you get exactly that. My 14-day Relief in Your Grief challenge brings you powerful, impactful, bite-sized daily content alongside the perfect meditation. One of the biggest struggles I hear from my members, clients, and people on social media is that they just need some relief from the stress, sadness, and pain that grief and loss can cause. But here's the thing, so many people are lost and unsure about where to start. This can feel like a huge thing to tackle, so we are doing it together, and we're starting with just 14 days. Give me 2 weeks and I will help you begin to take that anxiety, heartache, and anguish and turn it into peace, clarity, and hope as you move forward with your grief. Seriously, what do you have to lose by joining? Challenge your grief and give yourself some relief, my friend. I have no doubt this 14 days will be an inspiring, uplifting, perspective-changing experience for you. My mailing list will be the first to hear about when this challenge is live. Join now through the link in the show description.
It's that whole like, if you can't find it, create it or build it or
Mm.
whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah.
How beautiful. So how do you feel? Because I know like one of like your whole pieces of what you have built is like using that creativity, using this creative outlet to help, I don't want to say like maybe with your healing journey, but just really transforming in your grief. So how do you feel like whatever it is, writing, singing, which I cannot do to save my life, music, poetry, anything, like how has that helped you and how have you seen that, impact and help other grievers as well?
There's so much. I've actually written a thesis about this,
Have you?
but
All right, let's dig into that.
and
No, there's probably honestly, there's probably so many benefits to it that I can't even, yeah, there's a lot to
yeah,
probably dig into that,
well,
but
my thesis was about poetry and performance and community events, so and that impact on grief. But
oh, I
I
love it.
guess to begin with, just talking about the actual creative process, it really helps you take what's in your head and
Mhm.
reflect it back to you. Like you're actually looking at it, if you're writing, you're kind of looking at on the page, you can see what you've been experiencing. And so already that kind of gives you greater self-awareness
Yes.
and insight into your own experience and into your own thought process and feelings. And that like awareness as well can also be really useful
Yeah.
when you're going through grief. And then apart from that, it's actually, it's taking something internal and making it external. So you're kind of transforming your experience into something a lot of times of beauty, like I guess I don't think there's enough people that talk about like the impact of having beauty around you. And when you make a poem, or when you sing, or when you paint, some people paint their grief, that beauty can really actually have an impact on you. And it's been shown to calm your nervous system and to relax you and to reduce stress. And even, spending time in nature as well, which I'm really big on, that has a similar effect where you're kind of just, it just eases all the things that come up for you in grief. And it allows you, and also like sharing with other people or hearing other people's stories really gives you another way to look at things.
Yes.
That's one thing. And unexpectedly, I found that hearing other people's stories doesn't just make you feel less alone, but it actually also gives you another option for how to deal with things, because you're hearing how someone else is dealing with it. And so it's like a transfer of information as well, and another way of learning how to live with grief. And so that was one thing I really was surprised by, because I'm like, oh, it's not just knowing that you're not alone, but it's also kind of learning from other people's insights, and also being exposed to different ways of dealing with grief and dealing with loss. And apart from that, it's such a great way to honor the person that you've lost, or the people that you've lost. You can write about them as much as you want, or you can sing about them, or you can dance about them. I've had someone dance as well, or actually someone improvised a song in one of the events about his mom.
So much skill that I simply do not have. Oh my God, I love it.
He was an artist, a visual artist, and a musician. So cool. But it's a great way to give yourself permission to actually talk about the person, to share stories about the person, memories. You can capture memories and you then look back at them when you're feeling, when you feel like, oh, you're feeling pretty sad. You can look back at the memories that you've captured, or dreams. You can write down your dreams. I just, there's so many different benefits to it, but those are just a few.
Yeah, so many different outlets. And I love what you said. So I definitely, my dad was very artistic. I joke that I didn't get any of it, honestly. But you know what? The thing is, it doesn't have to be perfect, right? You can try. The whole point is getting it out there. But what I will say is writing is definitely big for me, and journaling has been a massive part of my healing journey and shifting my mindset and all of the things. And so when you just said about, putting those thoughts on paper and sort of having them reflect back on you, I swear that is when some of the biggest aha moments come, because those are your honest thoughts right there, staring back at you, and you can't escape them. But I also love that too, because, and this definitely was a big thing for me, like at night when I had a lot of ruminating thoughts and just a lot of things going on in here, being able to just either put it on paper, or I would actually sometimes use like a voice note. So like I said, I can't sing, but I did like, I'll just talking it out literally with myself, which sounds so sad, but it was very therapeutic. And just like releasing that to literally anywhere else other than our brain, than in here, can be so, just calming. It just like puts it somewhere else just for a moment. And like you were saying, kind of gives us permission to just, take a deep breath and process it all. But I will say, like with painting and things too, just like the calming effects of that. Can you like elaborate on that? I don't know. Have you seen that type of like art form, and what has sort of come from that for people?
Well, I tried it myself at one stage.
And how did that go?
And I'm not a painter, but then my sister insisted on putting it up on the wall, which was embarrassing.
Oh, I love that.
But basically, I think the physicality of it was really therapeutic.
Yeah, like it's very calming. Like you kind of like zone out a little almost. I did, at least. Like,
but I think actually I did the opposite, where I was using like black paint or really dark green and just It was kind of like,
Fun.
it looked
Oh,
like a bit of an angry, well, you can actually get a lot of anger out as well when you're doing
yes.
something physical. So it's sort
Uh,
of like you can use it in any way that you want. You can use it to calm yourself, but also if you have a lot of anger or frustration
yeah,
or
great point.
I don't know, like there's so many
It might not
different
always be
emotions.
sadness. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like, yeah.
exactly.
Like,
Yeah. You can really the physicality of like just picking a color and just going hard on the paint is
yeah.
really therapeutic. So I would recommend it. It doesn't matter that if you're an artist,
Yeah.
I'm not a visual artist at all. And it was just actually I realized like it's the creative process itself is more important than the outcome.
Yes.
It's not about how other people judge your work or whether it's up to scratch compared to other people. It's more about actually the outlet, like the
Yeah.
catharsis and the just having a vehicle to express what's happening inside because you as you might know, like it just bottles up, and if you don't let it out, it can impact you in so many different ways, and it can
Mm.
become self-destructive as well because if you're trying to suppress it and pretend it's not there, it will come out and it'll still be there. It doesn't disappear. It just comes out in unwanted ways.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Very,
Yeah.
very much. Yeah. Like I said, we talked briefly about, as far as there's better ways to cope and some not
Mm.
so better ways to cope. So one of the things too that I wanted to touch on that I know is also very important to you as far as, and you're welcome to bring in like the art or the, writing piece to this is, really just embracing our grief as opposed to, avoiding it.
Mm.
So just talk to me a little bit about that, just your viewpoint on that, and just how people can better do that. Obviously, we've talked a lot about like through an art form, but if there's anything else
Mm.
you want to elaborate, just as far as embracing our grief, because I think this is a really important topic to talk about because a lot of people don't want to embrace their grief or, because it's painful, because it hurts,
Mm.
because it's sad, because it's draining, which is all completely understandable. But what you were just saying about, if we don't, it can really catch up with us, I think is a really
Yeah.
important takeaway from this conversation today. So,
Mm.
yeah, whatever thoughts you have on that, I would love for you to elaborate.
Well, I think, well, firstly, grief and loss is something that's unavoidable. As humans, people have been living and dying since we existed,
Yeah.
and even when you look at nature, it's just the cycle of life, and I think that's also a fact that people don't want to accept.
Yeah.
But there's a reason, like grief exists for a reason, pain exists for a reason. It gives us signals, like when we experience pain, like for example, it teaches us kind of when we burn ourselves accidentally and we pull back like that. If we didn't have that pain, we wouldn't know that fire wasn't
Great point.
a safe thing. So grief and pain are there to kind of help us.
It's survival in a way.
Yeah, it's part of survival, and it's something that we need to pay attention to because it can actually, and one thing I really advocate is just like let grief change you, because I think
Mhm.
change is something, a part of the grief process that people don't want to accept because people are so used to kind of living their routines or living in their regular life where things are predictable and things are comfortable and they know what's happening, things are familiar, whereas grief and pain and loss, those scary things, scary parts of life that people don't want to let impact them, or that they don't want to deal with. But
Yeah.
I would say that, making space for grief, whether it's just crying, like, or shouting, screaming sometimes, you probably there's times where you just need to do that. I think it will help you get closer to the things that truly matter. Everyone that I've spoken to who's really leaned into their grief has shared, and I've experienced it too, where you realize that a lot of things that you worry about, that you used to worry about, don't really matter that much, in the big
Yeah.
picture. It
Big
really
shifts.
yeah, it helps you highlight, like it highlights to you who and what really matters in life. And I think that while it is hard, there is a lot of good as well that exists within that. And on the other side of, you know, feeling the pain and processing the grief and expressing it, there's a lot of, I guess, things that you will never, there's a richer life, I think, that there's a bigger range of experiences that you can have in life after you've experienced grief.
I think you just explained it beautifully, as much as anyone can, right? But I actually had never heard anyone mention it like you just did, and I love that. Like it allows you, I guess, for lack of a better term, a wider, a bigger range of experiences, and I don't think people see it that way, and I can understand why. Like, people are like, I don't want new experiences, and if I have new experiences, I want it with the person who died. So thank you very much, but I'm gonna not take that advice. It's just like, okay, but like, let's take a step back, because the thing is, like, life will continue to go on, unfortunately, as much as we don't want it to the same way. There's no escaping that, just like there's no escaping death, right? So, it's, yeah, you sort of, what's the term I was gonna say, evolve or die, and that's a very extreme way of putting that, but you can either choose to embrace it, or you can sort of choose to live in that darkness. And I also just want to preface this, anybody here listening who's very early on in their grief, or it kind of still feels like yesterday or whatever, like it's very raw still, like, please, as always, just put all of this in the back of your head and just,
Yeah.
these are things, truly, these conversations we're having. I mean, these are the things that, as difficult for me personally as it was to hear in the beginning stages of my grief, I'm glad I heard things like this, even if I didn't want to believe it at the time, even if whatever. And it wasn't so much about like changing my mind and making me believe these things, which is not what we're trying to do here, but it's more just like planting the seeds for us to know that there is still a full and abundant and colorful life after loss. And yeah, we are not the same person, but that's not always a bad thing. And we could end up living a more truer version of ourselves, as you have, in some weird twisted way of getting there. But how incredible is that? And we know life is so precious, and it is short, and it can be taken from us at any moment. So why not live that way as much as we can, and it's tough. That takes getting warmed up to. That is not something I would have believed earlier on in my grieving journey, but that's why the right coping tools can help you,
Yeah, I actually now say like that even the grief was a gift from my mom, because she was the catalyst. And so everything that's sort of come out of that pain and the grief has actually meant that my mom is a bigger part of my life, even though she's not here in the same way. But I think, and that's another perspective, like you can think about, okay, how can I best honor the people or the person that I've lost through dealing with this grief and this pain, because is there something in there that, or is there like some sort of thing that I can, how can I make meaning out of it? I guess that's
tap into. Yeah, like,
yeah, you can't always make meaning out of the death itself, because there can be a lot of injustices or a lot of things that you think, oh, it's not fair. And so it's not about making meaning out of the death or the way the person died, but it's making meaning out of the new, I guess, life that you now have to navigate through. And so living in the reality of like them not being here physically, but then finding other ways to connect and honor them. So that's been, I guess, an anchor for me, because I think, well, I went through that because of my mom's death, and so now I can actually feel like I'm living more in my values and in a way that honors her.
Absolutely. Yeah. And thank you just so much too for clarifying that difference between, making meaning of our life after loss. It's not making meaning of the death, because I think a lot of
Mm,
people get really, for lack of a better term, triggered by that. They're just like, I don't want to make any, meaning from the death. This happened to me. This is really tragic. Like there's no reason behind it. There's no meaning to it. And I think what you just clarified is perfect. And I totally agree with that. It's like, no, absolutely. It doesn't, like, I'm sure both feel like we should not have lost our moms as early as we did. Desperately wish that was not the case.
mm,
We don't know why they got the certain types of cancer that they did. That might always be a mystery. That might always be very unsettling and
mm,
uncomfortable to think about. And it's just like, that just freaking sucks. Like sometimes there's just no better way that I can word that. It's like,
mm,
it doesn't feel, nothing about that's going to ever really feel right. It's like, okay, we can kind of get, I don't want to say hung up, but we can have our focus beyond that, or we can do what you obviously have done and choose to literally also through your art create something beautiful with it when we're carrying them with us as we do
mm,
that the best that we can, because what other choice do we have right now, right? They are gone. They are physically not here. So
mm.
I think what you've said is perfect. Like it's just finding new and different ways to connect with them, to bring them with us, to keep their memory alive, which you are doing in such a amazing way. And I have been very informed today, and I'm actually feeling very motivated to try some of these different art forms, despite how they might turn out. And just to kind of wrap this up, and we've touched on a lot of great like coping tools and things that people can do here today, but is there any, maybe just like a couple of tips or pieces of wisdom or guidance that you would leave someone here listening who is perhaps in their earlier stages of grief, or maybe even going through some of that anticipatory grief as we both have, kind of wherever they might be, what can you recommend or just say to someone here who's struggling a little bit?
It's hard because I
Other
think
than just like hang in there. Like
yeah, really, yeah, hang in there. It's and I would say that, I think it's okay to feel whatever you're feeling, because
Mhm.
I think when you don't know, you don't see examples of people in their early stages of grief, you just think that you're really like losing your mind and that you're not normal, or you just think that
Seriously.
you're, yeah. But actually all of that is normal, like that, those, you're in survival mode. And I
Yeah.
think it's just worth kind of giving yourself some patience and some grace to actually feel what you're feeling, and to be sad or be angry or be whatever it is that you're going through, because it's just part of the process. And I
Yeah.
think that's
It's just that
one thing I
we
would say. And
cannot
then
escape
as
it.
yeah, exactly. And then if you can find a way, find spaces or ways, outlets to just to express what you're going through, whether it is taking really long walks out in nature, or whether it is journaling, or whether it is talking to someone.
Mhm.
There's, I think, well, I think grief can be, you can process grief in all kinds of ways, whether it's cooking, or
Yeah.
just doing something that, or crying, that's
Yeah.
that's always there. So I think, yeah, just let it out. And if you need to make time for it, as I think we mentioned at the start, do that. If you need privacy, do it, in your car or wherever you can find 10 minutes to just
Yeah.
let it out. I think it's good. It's good to let it out. So yeah.
Yeah. I did mention we were going to come back to that, and I think you pretty much touched on it, so I
Okay.
won't belabor
Yeah.
that point. But I think what you just said is great. Like again, just 5 to 10 minutes, because this is actually what I saw in your post, and I was just like, yeah, she nailed it. Was like, we might have feelings or emotions or whatever come up at inopportune times, or it could be at
Mm.
work, or we just don't have the luxury of losing it, so to speak, whenever we want, or maybe we just don't
Yeah.
want to. Maybe we don't want to, like you said, we're saying earlier,
Mm.
maybe we're not super comfortable being that way in public, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So really, again, physically, literally holding that space and doing whatever of the, maybe this, some of the things that we talked about today, certainly journaling, I
Mm.
think we can both attest to that one, but however that release sort of has to happen. And then, and it's not like we might not get tripped up in other parts of the day, or we might not get triggered by
Mm.
something, or a grief burst might make itself known. But I do think, and you might be able to attest to this too, like I think in holding that space, we can better equip ourselves for when and if those do come up, because
Mm.
we know how to handle it a little bit, or we sort of maybe we got our crying session out of the way for the day and we're just like, oh God, here we go again. But like, it just, yeah, it just gives it that space to be witnessed, which is all it wants, because it is trying
Mm.
to help us, survive and make sense of it all. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. Well, this is an amazing conversation. I could honestly go on for another hour with you. I mean, especially again, like I said, just so many crazy similarities between some of our stories and our sweet moms and all the things. But I don't know. I feel very enlightened, and you just have such a beautiful energy to you. So just thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing your mom with us. But also, I think everybody here can walk away with some really amazing tools to try, and just find a little relief in our grief. Thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks, Tara.
I am sending you a huge thank you for tuning into today's episode, my friend. I'm so grateful you're here and for the steps you are taking to heal your heart, open your mind, fulfill your soul, learn, grow, and evolve, and move through this crazy thing called life in big, beautiful, impactful ways. Visit lossesbecomegains.com for my blog, ways to work with me, to shop my daily journal, and so much more. And be sure you're following along on Instagram and Facebook at Life with Grief Podcast. I love seeing new faces, meeting new people, hearing your stories, and supporting you however I can. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you haven't left a rating or a review, please do so. I would so appreciate it. Or if you feel so inclined, to share this episode or this podcast with someone who could use it too. I'll catch you in the next episode.